Hello and welcome to the Expat Reality Podcast. I'm your host Annie.
And I'm your host Steve.
And in this podcast, we're going to explore the reality of living life as an expat in Australia and what it really means to feel like you belong.
Join us as we uncover the challenges and opportunities that expat life presents on the search for settled.
With our stories, tips and interviews, see us as your two friends to help you navigate expat life abroad. Just to let you know, this video podcast series is brought to you by the team at Auric Migration and Mobility. Now, Auric have helped us personally with my visa process to Australia, and we only know too well how difficult the entire process can be if you're doing it by yourself. They have also helped hundreds of our followers, and they're offering our listeners an initial assessment for free. Email them your visa situation, questions or concerns, and they will get back to you at no extra cost. Simply mention the Expat Reality Podcast when you email them at migration@auric.com. Auric is spelled AUREC. So that's migration@auric.com. Welcome back to the Expat Reality Podcast. I'm your host, Annie.
And I'm your host, Steve.
And on today's podcast, I want to welcome Emma Edwards from the Broke Generation. She is honestly one of my favorite content creators. Now, if you haven't heard of Emma before, she's a writer, creator, and educator, originally from the UK, and she's living in Melbourne.
She creates content, classes, and courses that leverage the fields of money psychology and human behavior to help us feel more financially confident. Her platform, The Broke Generation, comprises of a weekly podcast, newsletter, and content from Instagram and TikTok. Plus, she's just launched her brand new journal called Pulse Money Journal to help you keep your finger on the pulse of your financial behavior. So, she's a financial wizard. So I think we've got lots to learn here.
So welcome, Emma.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat about all things expat and money. It's a complex partnership, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Firstly, I just want to say to you, thank you so much for, you've personally helped us figure out how to save money properly. I was just saying to Steve, how many years ago was it when you started and we downloaded your ebook, and it honestly blew our minds about how you can actually properly save money by opening up various accounts and figuring out what you need to do in terms of how to position all your money. So
totally, I think it was like a light bulb moment for us. Was your content was it changed our perception of how to deal with money and think about it. So I think there's a fundamental shift that we went through, and you totally changed it.
And you know what? It's like, it baffles me how we go to school, we spent all those years in school, and yet no one explains to you how to save money. It's like one of the most important fundamental parts of your entire existence, and yet we're supposed to work it out for ourselves. So thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm flattered. It's nice to have a real life case study. I'm glad that the content helped you.
It absolutely works, and it still continues to work to this day as well. So I feel like I want to take it back to the sort of beginning of how you became a finance content creator. How on earth did you decide that you wanted to step into that field and start educating people really about giving advice on how you've saved money?
Yeah, so it all started in sort of 2018, I think, was when I started. I had such trouble myself saving money until that time. The only time I'd really I knew that I'd always been not very good with money. You're aware that you don't really save much and you don't really know where your money goes and all that stuff. But it wasn't until we were faced with saving the $7,000 for the partner visa in Australia that I was like, oh, wow, this is really the only money I've ever had in my life. And it's got to go straight into this bill. And I think when I had that goal, so I did that, I was saving for that in 2016. And that was kind of my first ever experience of actually being able to hold on to some money, because it was quite not quite as far as life or death, but, get deported or don't. So I was really on the clock to save it. And so then I sort of thought, I've got some good habits coming up here. I'm finally being able to do it because I had that pressure. And then as soon as that was done, I hadn't really done any of the proper work. I just went straight back to the way I was. And then over the next couple of years, you get to that age where people start the early adopters start buying houses and having like $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 weddings, and you're like, oh shit, like you've been saving money all this time, and I didn't really know about that. I thought we were just like all a mess together. So I decided enough was enough, and I thought I've got to really get into this and start working out what's going on.
Isn't everyone a mess? Like, I'm a total mess.
I was totally thinking that. I'm like, what? People save that much money? I just assume we're always saying this, like people with these like $5 million houses in Sydney, obviously it comes from generations, like their parents and then their parents' parents have like invested all this money and that's how they've accumulated it. Like to people, how can people actually afford these places? Like,
well, that's it. But honestly, there's people out there who are saving and are putting money away, and there's a strategy to it. There's a whole story. I mean, so yeah, please continue. What's the whole story behind that?
Well, so I started sort of going, right, I've really got to start saving some money here. And I was realizing how hard I'd found it. I'd still had some credit card debt that was still in the UK. So it was very easy to bury my head in the sand because I was in another country. And I kind of thought, I'll get to it. But I just wasn't, I kept thinking I'll sort it out when I get older and I'll learn all this stuff when I get older. But like I was in my mid-20s by this point. So I was really kind of realizing that I had to change something. And so I started really looking at why the budgets weren't working. Like I kept sort of going, right, I'm going to save some money this month, and every single month it wouldn't work. And like every single Monday, every single birthday, every single New Year, I was starting over again, have another shot, and I could never, it was always something on my to-do list that I had to finally save some money and finally pay off this debt. And it just felt so insurmountable. But I started breaking down where my money was going, and that was eye-opening. Because we always think we know. I mean, even now, being, somebody that's made a career of this, if I take my eye off the prize for a bit, because, everybody does, nobody's all over their finances all the time, and then you go back to it, we think we know so much about our money when we don't. There's always something that we miss if we're not really involved and really setting goals and plans and whatever. So I broke it down really simply, and I started sort of trying slightly different ways of saving money and sort of setting myself little challenges and sort of like maybe having a week where I was like, I'm not going to buy anything, but not just for the sake of it, just to like save a bit of money, but really look at what was happening during that time. Where was I wanting to spend the money? What were those like impulses and habits that had been obviously ingrained in me for as long as I'd had my own money? Why was I living in this paycheck to paycheck space? What, and it was various different things from like having, I had an eating disorder at the time, and it was kind of in many ways linked to that. Like I was spending a lot of money on that. And I also was, didn't have a great sort of sense of self-worth. So I was just sabotaging pretty much everything I did. Everything was just a constant cycle of like binge spend, binge this, binge that, then repeat, just over and over again. So I was really breaking down the why behind that. And in that, I was coming up with some kind of interesting insights, interesting techniques that I thought wasn't really what I'd seen around when I was looking at other money content. Other money content definitely helped me get engaged with it, but I was sort of thinking, I think there's a more interesting way of doing this that might connect to other people that are like me. So then I started my blog. And I wasn't going to do social media with it at all, but a friend of mine had said, I think this would be quite good on Instagram. And I was like, maybe you're right. We learn about makeup and clothes from social media. So why can't we learn about saving as well? And luckily I kind of had that thought at a really good time, because it really sort of, the finance creator space really took off after that. So that was like 5-6 years ago now, which is wild.
And I think a lot of people, everyone has that kind of seesawing, or have at least experienced that kind of seesawing behavior. Like we think, I'll go and have this big splurge and then I'll kind of take it easy. But I guess, changing the way you think about that is kind of one of those steps towards, sorting your finances out, I guess. And so, it's really, really hard to, to kind of make sure you're on the eyes on the prize all the time.
Absolutely. When you were saying that, I was just remembering back to the days when, especially when I lived in England, and it would come to a Friday and I'd be like, going out tonight, better go to the shops and buy a new outfit for the night out and like you'd never wear that same outfit out again. So you'd be like, okay, well, I can't wear that again because I've already worn it. So then the next weekend, same again. And it just keeps repeating. And then you get to, by the end of the month, you're like, I've got no money. Well, for me, it was always actually as soon as I got paid, I never had any money because everything went out onto rent, which was so crazy expensive in London when I was earning next to nothing with the wages back then. But it makes it so hard to get out of that rut. So, how would you envision someone who is in a rut? What would you recommend that they do in terms of how do they break out of it?
Yeah, and I mean, to anyone that is in that situation, I so deeply sympathise, because it is such a, when you've got such a long way to go, whether it's paying off debt or building up savings or whatever it is that you've got to do, if you're at zero or negatives, the mountain feels impossible to climb, especially like you say, when you've got a small gap between your income and your expenses. At this time when I was starting all this off, I hadn't been in Australia all that long, and I was having a terrible time getting work. So I'd been able to get like a contractor role. So I wasn't getting sick pay, holiday pay, super, none of that. And I was taking home about, after, I think before tax, it was like $700 a week or something for like full-time work. And, rent is whatever it is. And I had a small gap as well. But what kind of helped me first start was let go of the end goal at this point, because when you're looking at going, I want to save 10 grand, or I want to pay off a credit card, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, when you are making those micro steps, no matter how focused you are or how much knowledge you've got, it is going to feel shit because you're going at such a slow rate. So start with much smaller goals and actually start with, make it a learning experience, because everybody is individual. Everybody, you're saying you had that experience with getting dresses or outfits for nights out. I think that's a big culture, particularly in the UK. Whereas for other people, it's other things. I had a similar thing, but I also had like a really big kind of obsession with buying like health foods and gym classes and stuff at the time. And for me, it actually really helped to work out not only what was I buying, but why exactly was I buying that? And when you've been in that kind of rut, as you mentioned, for a long time, you can get, and it can start as early as childhood, or it can come from another point in your life. But when you are in that rut, you get so used to money being difficult that when money's difficult, you're not surprised. So like the kind of psychological term is learned helplessness. You get really, really, it's kind of entrenched in this reality. And there's a concept of the financial comfort zone, which can actually determine your financial behavior and can keep you perpetuating those behaviors that you actually, are wrong and you don't want to do them, and they're not serving you. But in a way, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. You're actually, as much as you hate this financial situation, you're used to this financial situation. And so that's why we go, start again next week, because we know how to struggle because we're already doing it. So sometimes, like, it's a really counterintuitive one, and it feels the resistance comes up because people go, well, no, it's not my comfort zone. I don't want to be in this situation. But habits wise, it's habitual. You know that if you spend the last of your paycheck the day before you get paid, you're going to get paid again, and we'll try again next week. And it becomes such a cycle. So for me, I would say, to kind of round that out, set much smaller goals. Just try and do 1 week where you got $10 left at the end of payday, or don't reach for credit, or 2 no spend days a week, or whatever your vice is, no coffee or no clothes, whatever, for a small period of time, and really learn about what that is. Be, really kind of gentle with yourself around that. And I thought I had another thing, but I've forgotten.
I was just thinking, actually, when you were saying that again about shopping, because that was always my biggest vice, and it's only taking me to live regionally now in Australia, where I'm not near a Zara or any shops like that, where I don't really shop that much at all anymore. But I remember I always used to say to Steve, like, I just buy clothes and I'd be like, I can just take them back. But then in my head, I'd be like, oh, well, I'm taking it back because it's now free money, so I can just buy something else now.
Yeah.
Free money, right?
I'd always say it's free money.
Wow, I just love the concept of free money. It just sounds great, right?
It does feel like that, though. And it's like, it's actually a thing. It's like a human bias called mental accounting, where you've mentally parted with that money. Actually, I think this covers under mental accounting. But regardless, like, psychologically, you have parted with that money. So you're ready to deploy it in another way, because you're like, well, I'm surviving without it. So...
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So being from the UK, do you want to take us back to why you ended up in Australia? Like, what brought you to Melbourne?
Yeah, I love telling the story. Fucking love telling this. So I was living in the UK, I was living in London, I was, trudging through life with my £6 an hour working at Pizza Express. It was
I
good
like
times.
Pizza Express, by the way.
I love Pizza Express. I ate a
Pizza
lot
Express.
of it. You got free
should we
food,
say
so that was good.
favourite meal at Pizza Express?
Oh, pepperoni pizza, of course.
Americana.
I used to always get the salad. Oh, chicken salad was my favourite.
Salad.
I know. It doesn't sound right, does it?
I like the Calabrese pizza, the square one.
Who goes to Pizza Express and has a salad?
I know. Doesn't make any sense, does it?
Who makes it their favourite? Like, why would it be your favourite? Anyway.
It's all good there. It's all good.
It's all good. Anyway, so I digress.
Yeah, I was working at Pizza Express, which is obviously a critical detail to the story. It's not. But my housemate that I lived with at uni, we'd moved on to London together, and Tinder had just come out.
Oh.
And she had downloaded Tinder, and another one of our friends was staying with us at the time, and they both downloaded Tinder, and I was like, I'm way too cool for this. But within 24 hours, I had Tinder. And it was excellent. Like I've never been one of those girls that got a lot of attention from men. So to have Tinder was like Disneyland for me, because I was like getting swipes and I was like, oh, I'm the hottest shit. Anyway, so I was dating and having my single girl era, because I'd never really had that before. Some of my friends had it at uni, but I wasn't very desirable. So anyway, so my friend starts going out with this Australian guy from Tinder, and we were all like, for goodness sake, like this is never going to work. But he was really nice and she really liked him. We were like, okay, maybe this will work. And he was traveling with a friend. They were over in London for 6 months, and he had this friend, and I was like, oh god, that poor guy, like his best friend's copped off with some girl and now he's on his own. So we were like, oh well, we'll invite him with us, like we can do like pseudo double dates. And then I was like, oh, imagine if we fell in love, how funny would that be? And we did.
Oh, wow.
But the other couple are also still together, they're also married.
No
so this
way.
was 9 years ago. So anyway, we did long distance he was going back to Australia like a couple of weeks after we got together, actually. Did long distance for about 16 months, and then I came over here on the working holiday because I luckily hadn't used it yet. And yeah, that was weird because I was a bit like, am I moving? Am I just trialing this out? Like, what's happening? Anyway, here we are 7 years later. So yeah, that's how I ended up in Australia. So it was very like, oh, I'll go for a bit and I'll get a job, and then because we had to be living together for the visa and all that stuff. So
yeah.
it got very serious very quick. But yeah, it worked out pretty well.
Wow. And then you have recently just got married as well. So congratulations.
Congrats.
Thank you. Likewise. We had a very similar wedding experience to you.
Well, not really.
Well.
Let's just face it. Emma did a podcast on her wedding story as well. And so I listened to that, and I was actually a little bit envious because in her podcast episode, which you must listen to, she talks about how the morning of her wedding, what did you do? Did you just sat around, watch TV, clean the house, casually got up?
That's my idea of a wedding, like none of this stress or anything like that. Just take it easy.
We weren't stressed at all. Like I was one of the most highly strung people on planet Earth. I managed to have a very chill wedding day. Pretty impressive.
Amazing.
But I think the whole wedding industry's got a lot to answer for. I'm sorry, but don't get me started on that.
Well, that's a great segue into wedding finances. How crazy is that? Like keeping up with, all your peers and everything when everyone's spending like a ridiculous amount. I mean, I don't even want to even begin to imagine how much people spend on weddings, but there's this pressure that even for us, like originally we were just going to go to a registry office, which is absolutely fine, but Steve wanted to get you wanted to do an elopement, didn't you? And then before we knew it just started to build up and up. And we only had 6 people there, but we still spent like quite a bit of money considering it was only meant to be like a small thing. But in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, imagine having like a massive wedding and that pressure must be huge, let alone the expense of it as well.
I know. I do feel for people that do want a big wedding with lots of guests, and if they're in a group of people where they're all kind of getting married at the same time, because even if you're not competitive, like I feel like I got lucky really that I didn't want any of that, so it wasn't really a choice. I mean, it helped because we couldn't afford that, but I didn't want that at all, so it kind of helped. But I was like, you would feel pressure if like you and your 5 besties from high school or something were all having weddings within the space of 2 years of each other. Like you want yours to be good, like it doesn't have to be the best, but you want it to be fun. And yeah, I do feel for people because it's really expensive to even have like a basic wedding.
Yeah. But then you've got all those TV shows as well, you know, and like, oh God, I can't even remember what they're
Maths,
called.
you know.
Well, maths isn't real though, but
Well.
are most TV shows real? But anyways.
Are any TV shows
You know,
real?
when you have like the TV shows when it's like the bride's getting married and it's all about the build up to the day. And what's the one where the husband organizes the wedding? I've forgotten what that one's called, but
Oh yeah.
Don't tell
remember
the
that
bride.
one? Don't
No.
yeah, that's that one as
I know,
well.
I'm making it up.
But what my point to it is like that sort of culture around it is making you always feel like you need to. You want to be the one where everyone goes, oh my God, that was like the best wedding I ever went to.
Yeah.
And oh gosh, that pressure.
And
we
you
put on
compare
ourselves.
them. Like we've been guests at multiple weddings in the same summer, and like you do compare them because some of them are better than others, and you want yours to be a good one.
And I guess we kind of take that psychology from weddings and apply it to pretty much everything. I mean, cars, houses,
absolutely.
clothing, like it's just everywhere, permeating everything we really do, isn't it? So kind of that communicating your status and that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
And social media, you know, we've gone from like a few years ago, celebrity weddings were like the ones that made Hello Magazine or Heat Magazine or whatever the equivalent would be over here. But now you can see like everything from like a micro influencer with 50,000 followers up to someone with hundreds of thousands of followers and like you've just got visibility over everybody's lives and particularly weddings. And you know, the imagery of it all, like it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, but you want it all to look a certain way as well as feel a certain way. I don't know. It's a whole thing. I'm glad that I bowed out of the kind of mass kind of trends a bit.
I salute you for that. Definitely that.
But even like what you were just saying, Steve, in terms of that really keeping up with everybody else. And I know that especially in somewhere like Sydney, I'm not sure if it's like that in Melbourne, but you do feel like in certain suburbs around Sydney, you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to dress like smart. And same in Brisbane as well, where you like thinking I'm going to have to dress a certain way to almost feel like people will respect me in a very weird way. And
Well, there's the Fortitude Valley uniform, which is like a
Galar Hotel, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. And everyone's
I
wearing
felt like Shrek when I was in there. I've never felt so disgusting in my life. I was like, I have to go home.
all right, so let's just explain what that looks like if you've not been there. So in Brisbane, there's I can't remember what street it's called. I think it's St James's Precinct, I think it's called. But there's a hotel there called the Khalil, and that one little sort of street or little block area is very, very different to the rest of Melbourne, Brisbane, where it makes you feel like almost like you're in the Rodeo Drive version of LA. But weirdly, everybody's sort of dressed up like they're going to the races. It's really bizarre.
or gym.
And/or gym,
Like,
yes.
you know,
Let's not forget the activewear.
Activewear is featuring very heavily.
But it's like, you know, we always sort of end up there at one point or another, don't we, when we go down to Brisbane? But we're definitely not dressed like we're going to the races. And I'm like, quick, we better get out of here because I feel really like intimidated.
I'd have to sort of like, you know, just bring this point up as well. I mean, with clothing especially, I mean, my first thoughts are with who made it. You know, it wasn't made, you know, in a country where someone was in really difficult conditions and they weren't paid well and, you know, like a myriad of horrible things you wouldn't even want to think about just to get that clothing to you. And it kind of makes me think, well, you know, is it really, you know, okay for you to kind of walk around in this and, you know, maybe it wasn't produced in the best way. So ways away, you know, mind always comes back to that. But I guess that's what it is. A lot of it is psychology and money psychology is a massive thing. And I mean, please tell me all about it. What does the mind do? How does money psychology work? And how can we all like, you know, benefit from thinking about money better?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very open question, Steve. There's kind of various different principles from more like human behavior, like human biases, the biases we have about all kinds of things. They apply to money as well. And there's ways that we'll look at things that are based on biases and things like confirmation bias. So like the clothing, for example, like confirmation bias is a simple one that a lot of people are familiar with already. But you might be somewhere fancy like the Cala Hotel and you'll see somebody wearing an outfit, and then you might see similar outfits like that because it's triggered something in you that go, oh, that's nice if I looked like that. And then you might see it over and over again, and then it can make you purchase because you've got that bias there. So in terms of spending behavior, but there's also, you know, every individual person has their own sort of money story in a way. It sounds a bit woo-woo because it's kind of been co-opted by like the spiritual side of things, but it's a very real thing, much like we have a life experience, we have a financial experience as well. Right from our early years, we have a whole collection of what's called financial flashpoints, which are essentially like memories or key activating events that we remember that relate to money. Sometimes they're really obvious things, like people that grew up with families that said we couldn't afford things a lot. Other times it's things that aren't really directly related to money, but it all comes back to money. So things like parental breakdown, maybe the grief of a parent, often gender roles in families can form these flashpoints, and that kind of forms like a timeline almost of how we've experienced money throughout our lives, what it's been like for us in adulthood as well. And that together sort of forms a number of ways that we see money. And there's a few sort of research concepts that have been used to kind of group people into different sort of categories. A bit like, I guess a way that I talk about it a lot that people can relate to is, people are talking a lot about attachment styles now in relationships, like avoidant and that kind of thing. It's not quite that, but in a similar way to money, we have a relationship with it in a similar way that we would a significant other. And a bit like your childhood experiences can impact the way you relate to a significant other as a human being, it can also relate to the way that you experience money. So coming back to the example I used earlier of learned helplessness, a lot of the time, and people find this very confusing, a lot of the time, people that grew up in families that didn't have much money and money was tight, they go on to be amazing at budgeting because they saw that things were tight and they didn't want to do the same. That kind of makes sense to people. But for a lot of people that had the same experience, things were tight, it's the opposite because they've had this sense of learned helplessness and they go, yeah, money's hard. They go out as an adult, they don't know how to manage it. They're screwing it up and they know they are, but they're like, well, this is money, right? Like that was my experience. I saw that it was difficult for my family and I was like, oh, well, cool. Like, that's kind of what I expect. I didn't know that there was this other kind of side of financial confidence. And then when I discovered that other people were saving and this and that, and people had generational wealth and all this stuff, I was kind of like, oh, well, that's not for me. Because there's a huge identity piece as well, a shame piece, like a lot of shame around spending and what you do with your money. And particularly for women, if we spend on clothing and stuff, it's seen as frivolous and it makes you unintelligent. And how could you possibly spend more than you earn? Because money's often talked about in a mathematical sense, not a psychological sense. So mathematically, we all know that we need to spend less than we earn, but it's not as simple as that because otherwise we wouldn't be sitting there having this conversation. Money wouldn't be an issue. It would just flow freely. There wouldn't be so much greed in the world. There wouldn't be poverty. Like if we could just spend less than we earned, it would be fine. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of things, but that's sort of, I guess, a whistle-stop tour of how money is not just mathematical.
Wow, there is so much to unpack there. It's like, wow, because my mind instantly thinks like, when you go to a shop and there's like, well, actually a better example is like a website online and you see like three prices. There's one in the middle and then there's like one at the, either side of that, and one's like quite cheap and one's quite expensive. But they're all manipulated to guide you towards the price they want you to pay, right? So there's this almost like a battle out there where everyone who's selling things are already like engineering you to kind of be and spend things. And you see like television commercials, they're always like, not that I'm a fan of them at all, but you see them and they just, they're instantly like producing that almost like a thirst for you to buy.
And it's like in supermarkets as well. So like how they always put like the most expensive, products like at the front, and then you have like the chocolate bars when you're waiting to pay. All these things that they do is just yeah.
And so it feels like the cards are stacked. I was going to say, it feels like the cards are stacked against you, but sorry, anyway.
Yeah, well, similar. I was going to say something very similar. So we've got our own money psychology as individuals. And then on the other side of that, there's consumer psychology because we are individuals and we're also consumers. And, a lot of kind of boomers or like old white dudes will be kind of like, money's personal responsibility. You've just got to spend less than you earn. But if that were true, people wouldn't be out there getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars being experts in consumer psychology, studying marketing psychology, uni, that kind of thing. Like there's our internal experience. And then particularly nowadays with online shopping, immediate gratification, buy now, pay later, social media, all the kind of trifecta of of shit that's in our way. That's kind of doubled down on all that consumer side of things, and the way that we consume and consumption and money are inherently linked because you need one for the other. The way we consume has been completely hijacked. We don't make our own decisions anymore. Buy now, pay later comes in, and a lot of people go, oh, what's wrong with buy now, pay later? It's interest free, it's this and that. But to me, buy now, pay later has kind of given a financial mechanism to all of that kind of advertising stuff you were just saying. So when, you can split something into 4 payments and pay it off in 4 installments interest free. Yeah, cool. But what that does in our minds is after a while, you start seeing a purchase that's $100 as actually $25, because your immediate stump up is $25, and then you can forget about it for 8 weeks. So the first time you use it, you go, this is amazing. But over time, it completely erodes your perception of price.
Yeah. Wow, yeah.
We have limits and things. We all have category limits that we'll pay for things, which is why we'll pay, $7 for a coffee, but we wouldn't pay, or we might pay $70 for a facial and $70 for a coffee, but not the other way around, because we have these limits in our minds that we think are okay to pay for things. But that gets completely eroded when we bring in buy now, pay later, because everything's cut into 4.
Wow.
Swiping up on social media, you swipe up, and when you see somebody talking about something, you used to just look at a picture and go, that's a nice outfit, and then just move on with your life. But now you can tap for the details, you can go, you can add it to your cart without even getting off the couch. And the barriers to purchase are just so much more streamlined. So we haven't even really thought about it, and it's on its way to our house. And we're like, what? It's unbelievable. Our generation have grown up in a time where we've seen it change. We used to, I used to live in a tiny town in the UK where there weren't shopping centres and things. If you wanted something, you had to go much more out of your way to get it. You might have to wait, 2 or 3 or 4 weekends time until you were going somewhere else, or your mum would take you somewhere or whatever. Whereas when you look at the generation that have come after us and they've grown up with this being the norm, it's going to be even harder to break, because it's so ingrained, and those perceptions, they have been, the way we make decisions, the way we make purchase decisions, the way we see money, the way we see consumption is totally different. I have hope that I think that the narrative is changing slightly.
Well, I mean, you're helping that along, like moving that along in the right direction. And I gotta say, like, so because I sort of feel bad, and I put a lot of pressure on myself for not doing better with money. So it's nice to sort of have a bit of comfort in the fact that I'm stacked up against a pretty formidable, opponent here who's trying to absorb everything they can out of my wallet, using whatever malicious, money tactics they can to do that. So, and this has happened over a generation. So it's not like, it's just, my own sort of, not mismanagement, but not being able to do better with money is not, completely something that I should feel bad about. So,
no, not at all.
Yeah.
And I think with that as well, like, for all the people, who are wanting to move over to Australia and they're thinking, oh, it's my dream, I want to go and live in this, nice sort of tropical country and escape the rain and the cold. But yet they're thinking, how do I get out of my financial situation? How do I save enough money for the plane ticket, for the visa? How do I set myself up? So it'd be really interesting to know, what sort of tips would you recommend to anyone who's thinking about moving over and how they can actually save properly for it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion, because I think, particularly being English, I think that there is, I definitely had this when I lived in the UK. I think we're kind of sold this dream about Australia, that Australia is like the best place on earth. And Australians tell us that too when they come over. So I guess my first thing is, there's this saying that my friend told me, and it's everywhere you go, there you are. So regardless of whether you're dreaming of moving to Australia or anywhere else, just remember that there is no country that is going to change who you are, or change your past, change your personality, or really change your reality, unless you're going to change along with it. So I guess that's one thing. I was sort of, I don't want to say forced, but I wasn't sitting there thinking, God, I really want to move overseas, I'm going to make it happen. It was more of okay, this is the only way I can make this relationship work. I guess I'll give it a go. So from a financial perspective, I am definitely not the model student there, because I was using my overdraft credit cards, like saving a bit, paying a bit more off, because I was really kind of like, this is, again, my financial mindset was a mess at the time. So it wasn't the way that I would have liked to have done it. If I were to do it over again with kind of the knowledge I have now, always save up a lot more than you need. I think that, I don't know if it's still the same, but you used to have to have an amount of money in your bank account to get into the country, and it was all very, does anyone check? I am a people pleaser and terrified of doing anything wrong, so I had it, which, I'd use half my credit card and whatnot to get it there, but whatever. But I do think that's actually quite good, because you do, finding work here wasn't easy for me when I first came. And I'm white and I'm able-bodied, so the odds were in my favor compared to what some other people would go through, and it still was really hard. So I do think that it is a huge financial commitment, as is, and again, I don't think people think about this. I think people think that moving overseas is this amazing experience. It is a lifelong financial commitment, unless you are fully doing it for 1 or 2 years and then you are perfectly happy to go back to your old life and you never want to come back again. If you come over here and you make a life of it or whatever, your old life doesn't go away. So I think that don't just prepare for the upfront costs or the cost for the year that you're going to be here or whatever. You've really got to take on the lifelong cost of flying home to visit your family, or if you find yourself almost making a second family here and you want to come back here, I don't want to make it sound really bad, but it is, if we're talking about money from an expat perspective, and I often think about this for myself, and a lot of the way that I plan my finances in a broader perspective do have to take into account more costs than the average person. If my mum and dad and my friends lived up the road, my finances would be very different. Over the last, 7 years that I've lived here, if I count up all the money I've spent going home to go to my friends' weddings, that I didn't want to let those relationships go. Visiting my family, when people pass away, you want to go to the funeral. Like, we've seen COVID happen. You get locked out. You can get locked out of the country. Like, hopefully that won't happen again in our lifetime. But, who knows? Everything seems to be going to shit. So you just don't know. So I feel like that wasn't a very uplifting answer. But I wish more people knew the responsibility that you're taking on. Because it's not just dancing on St Kilda Beach and meeting friends for life and staying in hostels. It's like best case scenario, you really have a great life here. But with that comes the cost of being an expat, which is flying home and having people come out here, and maybe when they come, when you have friends and family come to visit, you're doing all kinds of things. You're kind of showing them where you live, and you're making up for lost time because you have so little time with people. Like, when I go back to England, I have to save so much money to be able to do all the things I want to do, because it's like, oh, here's our year's friendship in 2 weeks. Let's do all of the things,
You're going to Pizza Express, definitely.
Yeah, I actually do. You bet I do.
2 pizzas.
Yeah. On a Saturday night with no voucher.
Leave it large.
But you're so right, though, in what you're saying. And I think, a lot of that is to do with that sort of expat guilt that we talk a lot about on this podcast anyway, because it is such an apparent emotion that every sort of expat goes through. And you're kind of constantly wondering, where am I meant to be in the world? Am I meant to be in Australia? Am I meant to be back at my home? And then, that's a massive extra financial cost if you then do decide to move back home. And I know of a lot of Brits, especially when they do move back, they end up coming back just like we did. And you got to think about all those extra costs. I mean, it's a hugely financial cost, really, that you've got to sort of think about as well. And
I was going to ask about, leading on from that, actually, I was going to ask about planning. Like, when you think sort of long term, it seems like such a daunting, as you mentioned, a really daunting process. So as you said, you just want to take small goals, but what about on a lifelong sort of size, like where you've got sort of, you're thinking about your entire sort of, future? Is there any strategy for that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I'm slightly limited in the things I can say here, just because the regulations in Australia have changed. We're talking about superannuation and that kind of thing. But I think something that we're not really taught to do often, and it's difficult to do it on a mass scale because everybody's life is going to be different. But kind of really engaging with, for want of a better term, I guess, the system. Like, I think we kind of go through life and we ignore retirement and that kind of stuff. And particularly if you're an expat, you kind of go, well, I'll just find my feet here and I'll start putting money in my pension or my superannuation in a couple of years or whatever. Like, I hardly had any money in my superannuation, which is the Australian pension if you're listening and you're not from here, until I was like 27 or something. And, you know, if I'd grown up here and been earning money since a job at Macca's when I was 16, you know, you're so much further along. So I think definitely, I mean, from an expat perspective, particularly, try not to put off those things. It's hard to make decisions because you go, well, will I retire here? I don't know. But try and consider both sides of what you might do. Because, you know, you only have a certain number of years to work, and the younger you are, any money that you put anywhere, whether it's investment in your retirement savings or outside of that, the earlier you do it, the more time you've got for it to compound. So the years between like 20 and 35, 40, where we're more likely to ignore it, are the opportunity years. So that's kind of the biggest thing.
Wow.
You know, we were kind of talking before we started recording, but when you're thinking about as retirement, for an example, if you're sort of flitting about, you know, Australia, UK, where will I retire? Who knows? Or what should I do with my pension? I've got a bit of pension here, I've got a bit of pension there. Just keep track of everything. If you're going to move to Australia or move to another country, before you go, take stock of what you've got in the UK. It's so easy to be like, oh, it's a couple £100, I'll just leave it. But it might not be, and it might grow later, or you might have access to insurances and things in there that you might need later on. Like, if you can, just get your paperwork in order. Everything's obviously digital now, so it's a lot easier than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. But just sort of, I guess, keep your options open in a way, and don't have no plan because you don't know. I think that's probably, I wouldn't say a mistake I made, because I genuinely didn't know any better, but if I could do my time again, I would have been thinking about that sort of thing. I mean, I had no pension in the UK because I never really earned much money, but you know, particularly now, if at some point we move back to the UK, I've got a plan for what I'll be doing with my superannuation, because you can take it out if you go back.
Wow.
It depends on what you're going to do, but a lot of people, you know, I've had friends move back and they go, I think we're going to take it out, and I'm thinking, oh God, just think about it. Everybody's situation is different, and I can't advise you on what to do. But those kinds of things, you know, if you're in the UK, this is what we were talking about before we came on. If you're in the UK, you pay national insurance. If you move overseas, there are certain circumstances where you're still eligible to claim your UK pension even when you move overseas, if you have enough national insurance qualifying years. So if you move overseas when you're like 20, it's kind of unlikely. But if you've moved over at some point and you've got several years racked up, you can actually keep paying your national insurance contributions and top them up, so that if you go back, you can still get your state pension.
Wow.
Because you've been paying them all these years. So, and then you moved overseas. If you fall short by a little bit and you do end up going back, or you claim it elsewhere or whatever, I think there are some circumstances you can claim it if you live overseas. But, you know, those kinds of things, it's really, really difficult when you don't know what your life's going to look like. But just, even if you don't do anything else, just being aware of them, because if you've then got to do all the learning when it's already too late, it's a whole other thing, and you're more likely to bury your head in the sand and put it off.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, there's a lot of argument for YOLO and live your life now, but just check in with your life plans and your financial plans first, and then live your life now. Even if you decide to do nothing, at least you've decided, rather than having no idea and winding up shit creek without a paddle because you didn't know.
But how many times have you said you only, YOLO, but then, you say it 10 years later and you go YOLO.
Yeah.
That YOLO's
Too many
10 years later, same YOLO,
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to ask you about in terms of that as well, in terms of finances between two countries. So say, for example, you know, you're leaving the UK with credit card debt and student loan to pay off. What happens to them when you come over? Have you still got to pay them off, or you're like, doesn't matter now, I'm like over here, I don't need to pay it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I know that, I mean, again, I'm terrified of everything. So I was like, here are all my details. But a few people said to me, oh, I'm just not going to tell them. And I was like, oh, I don't think you're going to get away with that. And I do not know how they do it. the student loan company will track you down.
Oh my God, they
even
do.
if you are living in Antarctica, they will find you. They're like, we know you're living overseas, and you're like, how did you know I was here?
I honestly thought the student loan.
I just check Facebook. That's all I do.
I thought. I don't know why I thought this. No, I don't even know where I got it from. But I assumed that if I'd lived away from the UK for I don't even know how long it is, like 5 years, maybe 10 years, student loan gets scrapped. That's what I thought. But when
I wish that were true.
When we went back in 2018, I got my first pay, and I'm like, "What the hell is this?" And I'm like, "Oh man, the student loan
The
from
student
how long
loan was
ago
still hanging
is
around.
still trying to charge me."
Still hanging around.
Do they add interest on that student loan? Because I'm literally like, I don't know.
Interest free, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, they do add interest. Our interest in the
my
UK is substantially lower than like the US and things like that, but it will add on.
Wow.
And if you've been, I can't remember exactly what the rules are, but if you have been overseas for a certain amount of time, you do need to pay it from here, pay it back from here.
I've got away with that one.
Oh, there you go.
It's a bit of a worry.
They haven't tracked me down here.
They come and track you down, but I
Oh
mean,
my
you know,
God.
sometimes it takes longer than others. But yeah, it's one of those things. It makes it difficult because you've got to, you know, manage the payments. It's not taken out of your pay, so it feels you're paying it manually. So it does feel, you know, much more of a burden, but unfortunately it doesn't go away. Same with credit card debt, that won't go away. You really don't want to be leaving that to lapse. You've got to keep up with the payments, unfortunately.
So a credit card's a bad idea? Are they a good idea? How should we think about credit cards?
Yeah, good question.
Credit cards more broadly. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've got to be careful what I say, but speaking of them, you know, as a concept, the studies are fairly damning that if you spend on a credit card, most people will spend more money. But equally, that doesn't have to be true. You don't have to be a statistic. I think it's nice to be aware of that statistic because then you can do things to change it. And so something to be careful of. I wouldn't get one if you don't trust yourself with one. I think there are certain benefits to having them. You know, you can claim airline miles and things like that. You can get certain travel insurances and things. Obviously, that you don't know that they're necessarily going to be right for your situation. But I mean, there's a lot that comes into play. I had a credit card when I was quite young because it was sort of my emergency fund because I didn't have anything else to fall back on. And, you know, would a financial expert say that that's a sound thing to do? Not necessarily, but really what else was I going to do? So I think it does come down to individual circumstances, individual spending habits, but also individual needs, particularly if you are moving overseas. You know, you're not going to get a credit card necessarily when you first get to Australia if you haven't got a job. You know, if you're going to be traveling alone, you know, maybe it's not that we want to be going into that debt, but it's also having access to money if you need it. If you're traveling by yourself and you haven't got family, you can ask for money. You know, I don't want to say go and get a credit card, but you know, it's thinking about what you are going to do. Don't come over here with $100. You know, like you got to look after yourself.
That's a question to ask you. I know this is a very broad question, but if someone's listening to this and they're thinking about moving over, how much money should they save? Like, what would you recommend?
I mean, it's a similar question to how much should I have saved for an emergency, right? But just with an international border, it really depends on your needs and your circumstances. If you are 22 and you're moving over here to like couch surf or hostel surf, and if it doesn't work out, your mum and dad are going to fly you home, probably not that much. But if you want to come over here to set up a life, if you want to continue your career here, I would be thinking about saving up 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses, and maybe depending on what your circumstances are when you get here, if you're going straight into accommodation. It did take me time to find work, and I was emailing for work before I even left. I was emailing companies about 3 months out from coming, saying, "Hey, I'm coming. You know, do you have anything for me?" So, I mean, I would be looking. My answer is always 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. But you know, either side of that, add on or take away certain aspects of that, depending on what your kind of safety net looks like. I don't really have one, so I will always need a bit more, or whether it is access to something like credit. But I mean, yeah, if you can like text your parents and say, "Can you flick me $1,000?" and they say yes, you know, go you, enjoy. Yes, we love to be financially independent, but I mean, if it's going to delay you coming,
it was like, that'll be handy. Eh?
I remember spending, when I first came to Australia as a backpacker, and I spent everything, I think, within the first month. And then I had to get a job. I was like, oh, yeah, I kind of didn't think about that one. I was literally out partying like every night. But in terms of moving over, one thing that I think every expat's going to have an issue with is really comparing the costs. And it's really hard to get your head around when you start going, like when we moved over together, that was when the dollar was like really, is it weak, or I don't know which one it is, weak or strong?
Yeah, it was.
But basically, I remember going into Zara, for example, and going, oh my gosh, like a pair of trousers is equivalent to like 50 quid, which should have been like 30 quid or something.
Yeah.
And I was just like, how does everyone live here? Like, how am I going to get my head around this? Because
you're talking about that.
Oh, no,
well, yeah, it would have been higher.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
But it was just so expensive at the time. So with this sort of what's the word? with the psychology around understanding your finances, how do you get your head around the fact that you're moving to another country and yet nothing's going to cost the same? And if it's going to cost more, then how do you recommend to deal with that?
It is a culture shock, the cost of things. I mean, I think I'm still in some ways shocked now at what stuff costs in the supermarket. I couldn't believe it when I came over here, because you come over and you buy the things that you normally buy. You go, I'll go and get my pasta or this and that. And, certain vegetables are just so expensive. And I think a big thing sort of psychologically is at first it's going to feel normal to like convert everything to pounds or compare everything. If you're trying to really settle here, though, really try not to do it. Don't compare everything to the way that it is at home, because it is really different. And another kind of financial culture shock in a way is that, I mean, can't speak for everybody, but it seems to me here that the culture is that people stay at home with their mum and dad a lot longer than they do in the UK. Yeah. So I kind of came over here like had been out of home for 5 years, and everyone else was still, on a sometimes full-time salary, living at home with their mum and dad. Their disposable income is very different, and so their spending habits are very different, and they might be spending substantially more than you or have access to much nicer things than you. But they're not paying rent, so that's a very different experience if you are.
That's an unlevel playing field, right? That's not fair.
Yeah, and I mean it's often we mirror a lot of our behaviours and what our peers are doing, and we justify behaviours on what our peers are doing. And I definitely did that because I wasn't aware that people had more disposable income. So you kind of go, oh, that's okay, they're doing that. Well, that's a restaurant people go to. I'll check that out. And then you see the menu and you're like, Jesus Christ. So I think that's an interesting thing. But I think broadly, really, give yourself that first, couple of weeks where you're like comparing everything, and then really try not to with pricing and with norms of things, because some things are cheaper as well. You can sort of get into probably still in it myself, to be honest. You can sort of get into a bit of a salty, like, Australia's so expensive, and then you see how much tax you pay, and then you pay Medicare, and you need health insurance and all these things. It can feel like it's more expensive, but some things come off cheaper. You just got to manage things. I always say this, not necessarily in this context, but you can't, hang on, what am I trying to say? You can't live in a completely different experience using a system you used that's terribly articulated. If you want to live a different reality, you have to change the system you're using. So you can't necessarily buy the same things you would buy in a UK supermarket. You have to rejig that. You can't necessarily spend things in the same way you did in the UK, because you have to rejig that. But equally, you might be going to the beach because there's 9 months of warm weather every year. Different systems. You need a different system to exist in a different country, financial and otherwise.
So I think one of the things, and we're looking into this, is property. Now that's the big question. Everyone wants to save for a home and have that dream of finally owning their own home, and there's a lot to consider with the whole process of saving. But what are your thoughts and approaches on saving for a house, and what are the differences between the UK and Australia as far as housing is concerned?
I mean, to be honest, housing in the UK, I wasn't ever in a position to even be considering it as an individual. My only kind of knowledge of it is like my mum's, mortgage or housing conditions. In Australia, there are it's so different state to state. That's another major thing I'd say to notice about Australia, particularly with money. All the states are like different countries. Like I was going to say in Australia, a lot of properties are sold by auction, but that's only really in Victoria. So, I mean, that's not true everywhere, but there are different norms that the types of properties that you're buying are very different. Apartments are sort of seen as not bad here, but they're sort of, the construction of them isn't necessarily great. Whereas like I've got friends in the UK that have got flats that are like immaculately made from double brick and much more, the kind of, I guess, norms that you might be used to or standards or whatever are quite different. Everything's single story here, apart from maybe newer townhouses. Like that's really different. The houses are just kind of bigger and more open plan. And so I guess that's sort of in terms of buying them, that's a bit of a difference. But when we're saving up for property, I'd say if I were to go back and have my time from being younger again, the main thing I would have done is be putting money away for a property before I was anywhere near ready to buy one. I think that's, for our generation, that's one of the biggest challenges. By the time you even know which way's up and where you even want to buy and what you even want to buy and what even buying a house actually means, you needed to start saving yesterday. So, if you can put away $10 a week now for your property, it sounds ridiculous, putting $10 a week away for my future home, but it might just give you a bit of a leg up. It might mean that you can buy at a slightly better time rather than being completely at the mercy of how much money you've got in a deposit. And I mean, another way, like my husband and I own an apartment, and we bought that knowing that it wasn't our forever home, because we even now are still in no position to buy our forever home, and our future is uncertain because we don't know where we're going to live, expat, all that kind of stuff. So we have kind of taken a slightly different approach. We wanted to get something, so we bought an apartment that we lived in, and it's now rented out. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. Everybody's situation is different, but in terms of, I think particularly for our generation, we really need to, and especially for expats, we really kind of can benefit from looking at the sort of home ownership paradigm slightly differently, because the way that previous generations have done it, I won't say my parents, because my parents are all kinds of messy in terms of their sort of life trajectory, but a lot of people have got parents that got married when they were 21, bought a house, they still live in it now. That is not going to work for us unless you've got significant financial capacity. And so don't necessarily think it's not for you because the old way isn't accessible. There are other things. There are other ways that you can do it. And rent isn't wasted money either, particularly if you are spending time in another country. Like, rent is a very reasonable expense. Don't feel bad for paying that. A lot of people, rent's wasted money. Don't buy something too soon. Don't buy property too soon because someone told you, because your uncle at the family barbecue told you rent was wasted money. It's not true. Your flexibility is, especially if you're coming from overseas, your flexibility is really valuable, and it's okay to pay for that. But just sort of having that foresight to think, one day I might like to own a home, if you would, and putting money away long before you think that you need it.
But what if you're in a position where you weren't that smart enough to realize to save money from a younger age, and now you're thinking, well, how am I logistically actually going to do that? Because I know most probably young Australians they feel like they're never going to be in a position to buy, like, ever. Yeah. So are there any tips as to what they can do now if they're not in their sort of early 20s?
I mean, relate. I mean, in terms of buying somewhere to live in, I mean, we're still renting as well. It really depends on everyone's financial situation. Sometimes there are, the First Home Super Saver scheme, if you're in Australia, is, a mechanism to help you sort of park savings for a future purchase if you're starting now as well. There are a number of conditions around it. You definitely need to look into it. There are a few schemes and things like that, but again, it really depends on your circumstances. I'd say, if you're starting to think that you may never have enough to purchase, it kind of comes back to that, looking at it slightly differently, because maybe you can't purchase what you thought you wanted to get, but how can you change that up? I mean, COVID's really blown out the way we work, right? So maybe it means a different area or a different state or whatever. I know it's not the most helpful information, because we should be able to just buy where we want to live. The system is broken.
Yeah, definitely.
But I mean, some people might sit around and wait for the system to change. I don't know that it necessarily will anytime soon. So finding ways that you can participate in home ownership.
Which kind of, sorry, yeah.
No, that's it.
No, I was going to say, well, it kind of nicely segues into another thought I had, and that's about investing. I mean, that's another way. I mean, it's not just housing that you would have as an asset. I mean, you can have, you can invest in the stock market, you can buy art, you can do all sorts of, I mean, there's NFT craze went on, all that sort of stuff.
Sorry, go on.
So many different things like you could put your money into, and I know this is not a space for like giving financial, direct financial advice for people's situations. But that said, is there like a sort of I guess for want of a better word, a sort of a place that's better to sort of explore, or in terms of investing? Should I look in the stock market? Should I look towards...
And also, especially if you're earning more money, like once you start to earn more money, are you just, like most people, just start to spend more money? Like how are you meant to sort of keep control of that without just going too crazy with it?
Yeah, if you have got a surplus of income, putting some of it into an asset class that may be able to grow, because obviously if it's sitting in your savings account probably isn't out earning inflation. So inflation's obviously like 7% at the moment, and your savings account may only be earning 4 or 5%. So in theory, beyond the liquid cash you need to have access to, after that you are technically losing money. So obviously buying property is one way that people have traditionally outpaced that, but now a lot of people are looking to investing in shares in the stock market, whether that's in your home country or in Australia if you're living in Australia. There's also crypto, which I am not I'm not gonna even suggest, but it's a thing. People are doing it.
I was never a fan of crypto. Crypto people out there are not going to like me for that, but I was never a fan. Sorry.
No, it wasn't. It's always been too volatile for me. It's got too many question marks for me. But either way, some people are doing it. I guess for our generation, financial literacy and investing in information from people that are allowed to give it is more accessible than ever. General information, even if you're in Australia, go to the ASX website. There are courses and PDFs and workbooks and things on there that will teach you about investing. Books like Girls That Invest and She's on the Money, Investing with She's on the Money. Sorry, there are a lot of books that can teach you about that stuff, and it's sort of a way of getting into an investable asset without having to stump up the deposit for a property. So ideally, we want to have diversified investments, which is, why people like to have property as well. And obviously you need property to live in as well. But if that is inaccessible to you, you don't just have to sort of sit there with your 2% a year savings account for the rest of your life. There are other options. I'm not in a legal position to tell you about them, but the information is out there. So people are, our generation is approaching financial confidence and stability very differently. And in Australia, we are very lucky we have superannuation at the moment. We will be the first generation to retire that have had superannuation for our entire working lives.
Wow.
So that will change things drastically as well. That's not something...
I did not know that. Yeah.
I don't know the age at which it 100% starts, but it's been mandatory there's a certain age that after that, we will have been, for our entire working lives, the super guarantee was mandatory. So there will be that, which other generations haven't had. So that is one good thing.
Do you think that'll encourage the government to maybe, lower the pensions a bit? You don't have to pay as much money out now.
Oh, well, I would imagine that's their goal, yeah. Make people have enough that they don't need it. But, that is what it is. Yeah.
What if, what if you've got someone moving over here and they manage to get a job, but they're thinking, you know what, I want to have my little penthouse in Bondi Beach and pay God knows how much. How am I going to earn extra money? So have you got any tips about what are the best ways to find out about how people can sort of get a bit of a side hustle and a bit more money?
Yeah, look, I'm a big fan of the side hustle. Obviously, I'm not a fan of the hustle itself. Burnout is very real, and be careful of that. But I will, I have to be totally honest, one of the biggest kind of accelerators, I guess, of my financial confidence and getting out of that rut stage was earning extra money. So don't dismiss that. You don't have to do it You don't have to be working 24 hours a day. You don't have to be working nights. But I personally took out an ABN, an Australian business number, when I came to Australia because I needed it for my contractor job. But that meant that I could freelance work on the side. So if you have sort of a sellable skill like graphic design, video editing, podcast editing, all that stuff, there's so many things now. VA work, loads of work you can get, and you can have an ABN if you're on a working holiday. So that's a really good way to get, you can also further your career that way too if you want to start sort of hustling with something on the side. But other than that, more sort of like I guess quick win stuff. You can, there's obviously the driving apps that you can deliver food with. I know a lot of people are put off by Uber because you need a new car. But if you're using the food delivery apps, you sometimes don't even need a car. Sometimes you can do it on a bike or on foot. Or you can use an older car. There's another one actually as well called, what's it called? Amazon Connect, I think, and you deliver Amazon parcels in your car. So you go and pick up a bunch of parcels from a depot and they pay you like per block, which is like a certain number of parcels in a block, and you use your own car and you go and pick up parcels and deliver them. That's a good one.
Airtasker's one that came to mind as well. Yeah.
Airtasker, and I think that's a bit like TaskRabbit in the US, I think, which I think launched here and maybe didn't work out. But anyway, those sorts of things. But really? Also like, be creative with things, like anything you can do. Do you make great cookies? Do you, I don't know, make T-shirts? Like, it doesn't need to be, signing up for Uber Eats. I think that we can monetize so many aspects of our lives and our skills, which, it's a double-edged sword, definitely approach with caution. But there is a lot of, do you have some creativity? Do you have something you can sell? Are you great at going to thrift stores and flipping stuff? A lot of people make a lot of money doing that. You scour the thrift stores, you get to thrift for a living and then flip the stuff on Marketplace or whatever. Lots of things you can be doing. Don't be afraid to bring in some extra cash, because it can make a real difference and it can really accelerate you as well. Plus, it keeps you busy. So if you enjoy it, it's kind of like less time to be spending money, which is good.
Well, I suppose that's the thing. If you find something you actually don't mind doing, you actually enjoy doing, it probably makes it a ton easier, right? So something you're interested in is...
One of my favorite side hustles I ever did was cat sitting. So again, a lot of people go, I can't look after pets because I don't have home for pets to come to. But with cats, I just went into their homes and did drop-in visits. So there was a time when I was feeding 2 cats, going to my 9 to 5, coming back, feeding 2 more cats, and I was making $50-$60 extra a day just to go and hang out with a cat. And I love cats, so I was like, I'm getting paid to hang out with cats.
I would love to do that. That's a great idea.
So
I think
good.
I could do so. I could pat the cats.
Just don't worry about going to a cat cafe. You might as well just get paid to go.
You don't need to go to a cat cafe. You're getting paid to go to a cat cafe.
That's what I did, and it was
Bring your
great.
coffee. Bring your own coffee.
It's regular work as well, because if you get trusted by families, people go away a lot. So at one stage, at one point, I was hustling for the work, but right up until COVID hit, I had 5 or 6 or 7 families that I'd get regular work from.
Wow.
Every Easter holidays, I was booked every day for multiple cats. It was great.
It's amazing.
So think about what you like doing and see how you can, or even think about what people need. Even in the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone sort of thought, everyone was worried about losing their jobs, I was like, well, if I lose my job, I had a whole long list of things I'd be doing. I was like, well, I'll be going to the cafes and asking if I can delivery drive. And then I could see if people need their kids picking up. This is when kids were still at school. I had all these list of things, anything anybody needs, see if you can offer it. You've got to keep yourself safe, of course, but that's where Airtasker and things can come in as well.
And then I suppose sort of gives you that sort of financial confidence in a sense that you've been talking about, and to help you gain more confidence, not only with your finances, but within yourself as well. So great idea. I wanted to ask you, just going off on that as well, what are the sort of 3 main mistakes that you see people making with money?
Ooh, I wish I'd been prepared for this. 3 main mistakes. I'd say the first one is not organizing their money, keeping everything in one account, and kind of tying in with that, going, okay, so I've got this for the month and I'll save what's left. Let me tell you, there will be none left if you don't move it. And, for me, I can't talk about specific products, but for me, the only way that I could save money was to move it into an account I couldn't access, because if it was just in a different kind of compartment of my transaction account. I was just transferring it over when I was buying an almond latte. Oh, I've run out of money. Oh, well, I'll just borrow $5 from myself. Like, terrible.
We've all done
that story.
Oh my gosh, we've
all
totally done that.
it. So I think, not organizing their money. Maybe this isn't, I don't know if this would be what I would always have said if I'd kind of planned this, but not having any sense of direction or any goals. Goals are a bit of a contentious term at the moment because people are like, I don't want to set goals. But if you haven't, and this is how I describe the power of goals, right? Recently I had strep throat and I had to gargle salt water. Ooh. And it was like 30 seconds a day. And at first I wasn't counting and I was just like, and then spitting it out. I had no idea how long I'd been. And then I thought, I better count, make sure I'm doing it enough. And when I was counting up to 30, I thought, fuck, this is a long time. And I realized that when I didn't have that goal in place, I didn't know how much I was doing, but it was definitely less. And then when I had 30 in my head, I'd be getting to 20 and be thinking, oh my God, I've had enough. If I wasn't counting to 30, I would have given up at 20 because I'd had enough. But because I've only got 10 seconds left, or if holding your breath underwater or whatever, if you've got a goal there, you're always going to go further because you know what you're aiming for and you can see as the distance gets smaller, your motivation's going to go up. So not having goals and not having direction. And again, it can be hard to set goals if you don't really know what you want. Like it's very easy to go, I want to go to Bali. I want to move to Australia. I want to do this. But have some kind of goal, even if it's like a very broad lifestyle goal, to work towards to keep yourself doing it, because otherwise you're going to be thinking, what am I doing all this for? Especially when we're like hearing all the tragic news and the world's burning, you're thinking, what's the point? And then you just go and blow it all because you're like, what am I even doing this for? So we need some kind of goals and vision sort of, not necessarily vision boarding, but having like a vision of what you want your life to look like can really help with that. Psychologically, it's actually research to help you save more money if you're connected to a vision of what you're saving for. And then I'd say my third mistake I see people making is, I'm torn between two, but I'm going to say thinking they know more about their money than they do. I have this exercise that I often get people to do. I think everybody should do it every now and again if they live anywhere near like towns or whatever, or cities. Ask yourself how many times you think you go to the supermarket every month.
Oh, yes.
And then check how many times you've actually been. Because we pop, as a population, we pop into the supermarket left, right, and centre.
It's going to pop down, I'll grab this, going to pop down and grab that, pop down.
Steve does it all the time.
Oh, what? I don't.
You do.
I'm a little bad. I'm not ultra bad.
I'm going to get some milk, and he'll come back and it'll be like $50. And I'm like, what? How?
Yeah, it happens.
Especially in Australia, $50 doesn't get you much either.
No.
Especially
I've only got a little tiny bag of stuff. Like it's not like it's a lot.
And it's $39. So I'd say that's a big one. Often people get very defensive and they go, well, I know I'm not. I know I'm doing everything I can. Just a curiosity goes a long way. Curiosity and being open to maybe making some small tweaks. Because we all think, even me who's made a career of it, I always think I know where my money's going. And then when I look, I'm always surprised by something. Even if I know all the transactions, I'm always surprised by what it adds up to. And there's always something that you can check. Well, okay, that's a lie. There's not always something. People, generally live in hardship. But I mean, a lot of the time, there are changes we can make. And we have to be open to making them.
And look, I think we've got room for number 4. Like, you said you had another one up your sleeve there. You have to share it, please.
I'd say this is probably for sort of the other category of people that are the typically good with money people. Or sometimes it's the kind of more reckless people that suddenly reform very, very quickly. I'd say the mistake is not giving yourself some restriction-free spending money. Because I think, and I did some content on this recently, and a lot of people were really quite interested by it. We've all got those friends that are like really good with money. We all know someone that's really good with money. But often what can actually be happening there is a really strong, in the research, it's called money vigilance, where they're actually terrified to spend any money. So they'll go on holiday and they've got the money there for the holiday and the bills, but they're just thinking about how much they've spent on the holiday the whole time. Or, maybe they know exactly how many times they've been to the supermarket because they're literally torturing themselves, not going to get milk because they don't want to spend any money. Or maybe they don't overspend because they literally can't enjoy clothing because they berate themselves every time they spend money.
Wow.
I'd say that's quite a big, that example there is very extreme, but a lot of people who are good with money and maybe think that money stuff kind of doesn't really help them that much, can often benefit from having a bit of money to spend to enhance their overall well-being.
So the people you think that are like, nailing it may sort of have sort of something else going on behind the scenes.
Ruining it for themselves.
Yes.
One thing that we did recently, actually, which is, I have to admit, it's probably the first time I think we've probably ever done this, is we did an audit on our bank statements.
Yeah.
And we went through and we were like, right, what are we spending our money on? And oh my gosh, the subscriptions, I think that you had,
Subscriptions,
Steve.
they are evil.
Oh my gosh, especially for our website. And like, I was just like, what is this one for? And before I knew it, we were like doubling up on some of them. And I was like, we obviously, thankfully, saved ourselves a lot of money going forward. But even so, you're just thinking, oh my gosh, it's coming out every month. And I don't even know what that's for, but I'm just sort of turning a blind eye.
It's a leaky bucket. Leaky bucket.
God,
Yeah.
so bad.
Totally is. One tip, and I don't know how well this would work anymore, but it's worked for me many times pre-pandemic. If you ever find that you have got a subscription to something that you have not used, you haven't logged in, you can guarantee you've not used it, try emailing them and asking if they'll give you a refund for the months you haven't used. Because my friend in 2019, right before COVID, a friend of mine I worked with realized he'd been paying for Adobe Creative Cloud. If anyone's ever used it, they'll know how expensive it is. For like 6 months, and he thought he had cancelled. And I was like, just live chat them and ask. And they gave him $300 back for 6 months of unused.
Oh, I've got a good story about that. So when I was looking for my UK accounts, and there was something that would come out of my account every month, and I was like, I don't understand what this is. So I rang the bank and I was like, what is this that's coming out? It turned out I had been paying for like 8 years for a mobile phone insurance every month. And I got the money back. I actually got it all back.
How good.
I was like, what the hell? Like, I've not even used this in so long. And they gave me all of it back. And I couldn't believe it. Imagine
that's
that.
so good.
Imagine how many people must actually go through that and not even realize.
Well,
on the flip side, I had the first time I went back to the UK after I'd been here for like 7 months, and this is probably a money tip if you are moving overseas, leave a bit of money in your UK accounts, because I'd gone overdrawn by like 8p on like a PayPal transaction that had defaulted to my original card, and I owed like £900 in overdrawn fees. They reversed them, thank God. But I would have been, that was her goodwill. I was like, I've just come back from Australia. I did not know this had happened. And she was like, I'm going to reverse them for you, because they can sometimes do that. But, it was my mistake. I would have been liable for them. So don't leave your accounts at zero, and remember your logins and check them.
But that's the thing. Like, I've heard some horror stories about that overdraft, and there's some banks, I won't name them, but there's some pretty nasty banks where that was a big deal when I was over there in 2005-6. I remember there being a big problem that a lot of people were getting scammed, and we don't really have that same sort of situation with the overdraft thing. I think it's a trap that the banks set to really, trap you, to make sure that they squeeze you for as much as they can.
Probably.
And so probably my final question I have for you is, like, for anybody listening, your 3 top tips for saving money, what would they be?
I'm trying not to just reverse the 3 mistakes, but organize your money. Don't keep it all in one place. Give yourself, I personally like to organize it by like values and things. So I have like a separate little pot for my, like, I like to get my eyelash extensions as my one thing. I've cut everything else out, but I love my eyelash extensions, and like I'll get a sort of quarterly haircut or whatever. So I put that money aside, because there is no better feeling than getting to something and having the money for it, which leads me into second tip is the concept of sinking funds, or just, you don't even need to call it that, but things, your big expenses like your car registration or your car insurance or your car tax or wherever you are, contents insurance, anything you pay like annually or whatever, any of those big expenses, MOT, car service. Save up for it incrementally. So if it's, on average $500 a year, save a little bit from every pay. in advance, so when you get to it, you've got the money there. It's one of those things that people often dismiss it, and I did for a while, because I was like, well, I'm down $500 regardless of whether I've put the money away. Like, it's no different. How can it be any different? Like, I don't have the money. What difference is it going to make if I have that money there? My situation will be the same. But just from a psychological perspective and a control perspective, it feels so good to get to your car payment and go, oh, I've got my $500 sitting here. You pay it out and then you start again. So that's another one for like simplicity. And 3, I would say, really think about your personality and your tendencies when you're building like a cash flow system or a budget, because there's things like Barefoot Investor and they go put this here, here and here, and that works for some people and that's fine, but it didn't work for me because I just my brain just doesn't work that way, and I needed to kind of make tweaks to make it work for me. And I have certain some people go, coffee is a no-no, like Dave Ramsey or whatever, whereas if you really like it, you want to build it in, whereas other things you'll be thinking, well, I don't need that. So a lot of people build in like car payments and stuff, or say a certain amount of your income should be for your housing, but it's just not for anybody else to say what your percentages should be. And often if you're trying to get yourself out of a rut, you haven't actually got that much choice. Your percentages are what they are, and you've got to work with them. So I sort of think about this as in, we kind of don't think that we know our personality types all that well, but think about it as if you're planning a holiday. If someone was going, I'm going to plan your holiday, what do you like? You wouldn't just go, well, I don't know. You'd go, oh, well, I hate camping, but I love pools, and I don't drink, but I really like I don't know, comedy shows. You piece together a holiday based on your tendencies. You're not going to stay in a 5-star hotel if you hate hotels. You're not going to camp if you absolutely hate the outdoors. So it's kind of like it takes a minute for it to kind of marinate in, but try and manage your money in a way that works for you. Do you kind of spend hardly any money during the week, but you like a blowout on the weekend? Are you like an absolute stickler for brunch? Like, give yourself a pot for brunch. Think about the things that matter to you and the tendencies that you have and the pace at which, or the routine at which you tend to spend your money, so that you can build a budget around that without having to kind of fit into this mold, because eventually you're going to break out of it and then you're not really going to know quite what to do. It's a bit like eating healthily. People go, give up this, give up that, be vegan, don't have carbs, whatever. But if you can just find a way to live a rounded life and eat a well-rounded diet, eating the things you like and not eating the things you don't, it's going to last so much longer. And the same applies for your money. If you can find a way to fit in a little bit of what you want and leave everything you don't, it becomes a lifestyle. I know it sounds naff to say that, but it's not. You don't get to do this for a little while and then it goes away. We have to be doing this forever, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So you want to make it enjoyable if you can.
Such a good point, isn't it?
It's all about choices. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think it's about being kind to the future you.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, nice, Steve.
Ooh.
Love that.
Yeah. Motivational speaker.
Well, it's
Never know.
Well,
Gosh, I feel like we could just continue talking and talking. Your knowledge is absolutely amazing, Emma.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh, I feel like, where were you years ago when I really needed you?
know.
I feel like
Where was I when I needed me?
my life would be. We would be living in that $5 million home now, Steve. If we had Emma here all those years ago. But thankfully, you're here right now, and you're inspiring thousands and thousands of people every single month. So, I just want to say a big thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure,
Thank
you've
you.
inspired so many people. And guys, if you're not following Emma already, you really, really should. Like I said, she is honestly one of the best, if not the best, content creator on Instagram. Especially the way you produce your content is absolutely outstanding. It really is. So you can follow Emma at The Broke Generation, which is on TikTok, Instagram, her podcast, which she's recorded over 100 episodes on her podcast already. So you've got so much content to look through. And all your products as well are absolutely amazing. That journal, I'm going to be getting my hands on that for sure. Great
There's
idea.
like an absolute, bonanza of information there
She's
to
genius.
digest.
Content genius, I tell you. Oh, I love it. It's there for
I'm
you.
blushing. Thanks for the gas up. Put them on again. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a good
Yes,
chat.
please. Come on again soon.
Yes.
And, all right, guys. We'll be back soon for more from the Expat Reality Podcast. Thanks for listening today, and we'll be back soon.
Be good to you. Take care and bye for now.
Bye.